I'm very pleased to be joined by Kathryn Wylde, President and CEO of the Partnership for New York City. Welcome to CityWide. So, how's business?
Business is doing very well in New York City.
The economy seems to be strong. The recovery after 9/11 seems to be nothing short of remarkable. Was that preordained?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a couple of things. One, I think the response of the city to, after 9/11, the pulling together, the support we got from Washington in terms of rebuilding, the focus on quick turnaround and recovery, all of which was projected to be necessary if cities were going to recover, whether it's from a major natural disaster or from this kind of event. You have to quickly make a plan and execute, and I think that wasn't an accident. And then second, I think the election of Mayor Bloomberg was critically important. And as soon as he was elected, he was on the phone to every CEO of major companies, that, particularly those in Lower Manhattan, saying, I'm going to be there for you. The NYPD is going to be there for you. We're going to make sure planes don't fly over and scare your employees. Come back downtown, recommit. So I think that combination of circumstances, in addition, of course, the forces in the larger economy, the return of the mergers and acquisition business that fueled Wall Street and the phenomenal profits they've had over the last few years, all of that contributed.
Contrast to New Orleans, I mean, they didn't seem to have the same kind of civic infrastructure that New York did that was able to respond to the entreaties of the government leaders there.
Well, it's a tough comparison to make, obviously, and there you had a regional disaster where there was a significant geographic displacement. In a way, ours was much more contained, defined, and so the response allowed for, there was a much better support structure left in place. I think, in terms of, and in addition, New Orleans had been a city with huge issues and not a strong economic base to start with. And they were really not well connected to the global economy. I mean, when you think of New York City 30 years ago, would have had a lot more difficult time coping with this kind of rebound and recovery from disaster had we not been as strong as we were before the attack.
In terms of the global economy, there seem to be two forces pulling at New York City now. One related to 9/11, which is that the move of back office facilities to the boroughs outside of Manhattan seems to have slowed considerably since 9/11. And on the other end, there's talk about us losing our competitive edge to other large capital markets like London. Could you talk a little bit about where we are with both of those and also what they actually mean on the ground in New York?
Well, I think there's a new dynamic, obviously, where and most particularly, we focus on competition with London to be the world financial capital. But in truth, we just finished a study with PricewaterhouseCoopers of what's going on in cities around the world, and found that the real long-term threat to New York and London is coming from cities in other parts of the world, particularly out of the areas in Asia and India, where economies are growing, which are now able to raise their own capital for business. They don't have to come to New York or to London anymore to raise capital. So the biggest number of listings are in Sydney, Australia, or in moving to Shanghai. So long term, we've got a very complex issue as other parts of the world really challenge Western and European and American dominance of the capital markets, of business. And so it's kind of a long-term shift that we're going to have to learn how to cope with. I think New York is extremely well positioned. There's no other city that's branded throughout China the way New York City is. And I was actually talking to Paul Speltz, who was just head of the Asia Development Bank and is now working with Henry Kissinger yesterday, and he was talking about he spent many years in China, and he said, you ask any business in China where they want to be in the world, it's not London, it's New York.
What can we as a city do to affect these sort of larger trends or position ourselves to be able to respond to it? And what do these trends mean in terms of local employment? Well,
the question you asked earlier that I didn't address was the loss of back office jobs. And clearly the fact that New York City has a very high cost structure, a very high tax structure. Construction costs being so high has made it increasingly difficult for the boroughs to offer an economic option. Even New Jersey is no longer particularly attractive. I say even. Connecticut is only attractive because they offer significantly deeper tax benefits, tax incentive programs than we do in New York. So we've got a real challenge in terms of operations and finance jobs. And that's something that we have to think about. And also the ability of people that are filling those jobs, in software engineers, it is in the accounting and finance offices, where they're going to live, because even if you make $75,000, you can't afford to live very well in New York anymore.
Well, there's a lot of criticism historically of incentive deals for large corporations. It's paying the rich to get richer, and it's a race to the bottom. The mayor, not to oversimplify his position, but the mayor has been known to say that New York has always been an expensive place to do business. It always will be, but that the premium on places to live, work, and play, the creative talent that comes to New York is what makes up for it in terms of our competitive position. But can we count on our art galleries and restaurant scenes and parks and universities to keep the best and the brightest coming? And will that intellectual capital be enough to keep us as a financial capital?
I think we can count on that on the high end. As it's been pointed out, we haven't created a lot more jobs in the city over the last 20 years, but the average salary has gone way up. So we've got high value add jobs, and we have to keep going that direction. But on the other hand, we don't want to be like a luxury suburb where you don't have anybody to do the service work or to staff the restaurants that you want to have. So where are people going to live of moderate means in the city? And that's the problem we have, that up until very recently, really up until the last 10 years, we had a city with great diversity in terms of options for people. You could live a little farther away from the train and pay less rent, and today everything is priced as a premium. When we started working in housing in the partnership at the beginning of the 80s, there was not, almost nowhere in the city could you sell a house or rent an apartment for as much as it costs to build it. Today, it's just the reverse. There's no place where the sales price isn't multiples.
One of the factors that plays into this, and it plays into the housing operations that the partnership has had, is that when the city was in decline, it, as an entity, accumulated large tracts of land that people gave up because they couldn't pay their taxes. Under the Giuliani administration, and a lot of that housing was then turned back into affordable housing in neighborhoods to stabilize them and create product. Under the Giuliani administration, the city stopped taking property in rem, just sold off the debt in effect. And now, if a nonprofit developer wants to build housing, the city can't contribute the land to the project, at least on the same scale that it used to. So, given the fact that land values are so high, how do you even begin to create, to meet the needs for affordable housing?
Well, fortunately, there's a major plan that's underway with the city. Their Plan NYC, it's called. It's really the 30-year look at where is New York City going to be 30 years from now, and how we're going to get there. And we still have lots of underutilized land. We've got brownfields, we've got waterfront space. We have not maximized the use of our land. We have to reclaim it. We have to rezone it. There's a lot of work being done. That's underway, and I think that offers a great opportunity for the city going forward. That's going to help us solve the problem. So we're not really out of land. We're just out of developable sites. The option of having the city own all this land, have it off the tax rolls, is not economically an attractive option.
Is it an oversimplification to say that this type of strategic perspective from a business group might be viewed as unusual, that it's not just the market dictating conditions, and if the market says that everything should be priced really expensively because that's where the demand is, and working class people are going to get pushed 2 hours out of the suburbs, and you're going to have to pay them a different wage rate to get them to show up every day? Let the market control. Shouldn't that be a business group's position?
Well, I think we're an unusual business group. We were started by David Rockefeller, who always believed in in going with the market, but certainly managing that process and trying to maximize the benefits of the market for everybody. So that's why we were involved in bringing home ownership housing to neighborhoods that only had public rental housing, because Mr. Rockefeller felt every New Yorker should have an opportunity to own a piece of the rock. So I think it's not, the partnership is an unusual organization. We really are organized to be business, hopefully acting in the interests of the city, not simply a trade association or a chamber of commerce supporting business interests.
We're going to pick up that point about the partnership itself when CityWide continues right after this.
Mrs. Johnson, good to see you again. This is Mike. You can trust him. He looks just like you.
I'll be sucking up to you in order to make you sign the loan.
So, here are your low monthly payments and interest rate as we promised. Here's where they triple. The rest of this is really just here so that we get your house when you can't pay us back.
Such a lovely house.
Predatory lenders are never this easy to spot. Call us and protect yourself with the facts.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Kathryn Wylde, President and CEO of the Partnership for New York City. We were talking a little bit about the difference between the partnership and a traditional Chamber of Commerce. It seems to be that a Chamber of Commerce is sort of what's good for General Motors is good for the USA. The partnership, I think, comes from the other perspective, which is that what's good for the business community in terms of its ability to do business is also good for the city. Its good policy is good for everybody. Could you elaborate a little bit about what the agenda of the partnership is?
Well, I think we'd like to think of ourselves as a resource to public policymakers and to others that are interested in understanding what influence or impact various policies, laws, actions by government have on the economy, because we're all really have a shared interest in the long-term benefits of the economy. The economy grows, it's good for business, it's good for the city, it makes all the flowers bloom.
And where does small business fit in the constellation of the partnership?
Well, I think we have a couple of things. One, we have a investment fund that was established by Henry Kravis under the auspices of the partnership. He's a major private equity firm. He still chairs that fund. It was set up 10 years ago. And so we invest in future growth businesses. One of the big challenges for New York City is really faced by entrepreneurial companies that want to come here and grow. And that's something we think is very important, and a lot of our policy work is focused on that area. Right now, another area that we're concerned about in terms of the future of the city's economy is that we're not really regarded in the top 10 places somebody goes to find the greatest technology. And the future is really technology. It's an unfair rap in many respects because we've got great science here in our research and academic institutions, and we've also got the first adapters of new technology in the financial services industry, the media industry, but we haven't put it together or aggregated it. And so we aren't really thought of or organized around what is going to be the platform for future economic growth. So that's one thing that we think is important to think about.
When you talk to planners now, they use a shorthand of eds, meds, and arts as a way of spurring economic development and attracting people. Educational institutions, arts and culture, and biotech, medicine, whatever. Mm-hmm. When you're coming to go to a museum, you bring whatever dollars you bring, you leave them behind, and then you need the next person to take your place in line. The same thing with somebody who's coming to a college here. The technology, particularly I would think in the biotech and computer technology, the one place where you can leverage whatever organization gets built in New York. In other words, if you nurture a Silicon Valley company or you nurture a biotech company at one of the hospitals, that has the ability to actually grow beyond just attendance.
That's right. And unlike other cities and states, we haven't been as good at focusing on keeping the jobs generated by our great science in New York. And that's something that's changed in the last few years. It's a priority of Mayor Bloomberg. It's a priority of our new Governor Spitzer for a statewide effort to do a much better job of building the kind of efforts that have really California, Austin, Texas, the Research Triangle, North Carolina, where they've really matched the interests of government, business, and universities. They work together, and they've built a culture that is now known. It's a magnet for new business investment, new private investment, and that's where the action is. We have to make sure that in addition to being the financial capital of the world and the media capital of the world and the fashion capital of the world, that New York is also seen as the technology capital in terms of our strength in that area.
You mentioned the new governor. His, I guess, almost first day on the job, he met with your counterpart who heads a state organization, Ken Adams from the Business Council, and also the head of the state AFL-CIO. What kind of a message do you think that set, and how do you think he's been doing so far?
The new governor, I think, is doing very well. It looks like he may actually get an on-time budget after all the Sturm und Drang in the last few months and the advertising to the contrary. We think he's doing a terrific job. And in particular, we think that in wrestling with the biggest problems, workers' comp is one that's been on the agenda of both the labor and business community for a number of years. The fact that he made that, secured a breakthrough compromise on that before the budget was great. But now also taking on the health care situation. In fact, the governor's health care budget, he was accused in advertisements of cutting health care. In fact, all he was doing was making the increases somewhat less. His effort is to say, look, we just can't let business go on as it has these last years. This is taking a toll on us, and our patients aren't doing better because of it. And so we've been delighted to be able to work with the governor on trying to create a platform for everybody getting together to figure out how are we going to solve that problem. On the education front, he's making the case that we have to look at where the needs are greatest and not just go with yesterday's formulas, but really start to allocate funds for where the needs are greatest. So he's doing a lot of important things that business really respects. The governor's history, obviously, as Attorney General was a mixed one with certain quarters in business. But I think that they really, I've seen the response of the business community to having somebody who is really smart, really grounded in the facts, knows exactly what he's doing, is focused on substance, not politics, has made a huge difference and has really been great.
Well, I want to take that description of the characteristics for a second, because on the one hand, you have Spitzer comes from a regulator's point of view. It was sort of, you know, I don't want to say smack people around to get them in line. I've heard him speak with great passion about maintaining the integrity of the capital markets in particular, and that's why he was so passionate that people not be taken advantage of. But he didn't come out of a business background. He just came from a sort of a substantive and focused background. The mayor, on the other hand, is a businessman, as you mentioned before. His personal intervention with the business leadership of the city has been critical on any number of issues. So if you were to take a step back and say, what are the characteristics of leadership, and how can the business community encourage people with those characteristics to come forward? Do you need a business background? People talk, you know, is that too facile an answer to say that we need to, you know, run the city more like a business, or is it something more than that?
Well, I think that business people are comfortable with a predictable, direct kind of relationship. Politics is an art, not a science, and political factors that public officials and elected officials have to deal with are very confusing to business. It means a circuitous route to get to an end that is sometimes uncertain. It's responding to factors that aren't necessarily substance, but are style and other things. Right. So I think that what they look most for in public leadership is not a business background, but the ability to talk straight. To an example, Cory Booker who is the new mayor of Newark, is not somebody with a business background, but he's made a great impression on the members of the business community that met him because he's so focused, directed, and clear about what the problems are, what he wants to do about them, and on developing an agenda that makes sense to get there.
The CEO, I think it was, of Walmart recently said that he'd given up on coming to New York because it was just more hassle than it was worth given the expenses. The head of the Central Labor Council said good riddance, they're not a good corporate citizen. Putting aside the specifics of Walmart itself, should the city be discouraging or encouraging businesses based on their perception of whether they're good corporate citizens or not? I guess one of the things that their partnership encourages businesses to do is to be good corporate citizens. But is it something that government should take into account in its decision making?
Well, obviously, government intervening in an individual business or industry is at their peril. Because ultimately what government needs is strong tax revenues from income taxes and business taxes to keep going. So you have to tread very carefully. I think one of the last things Jane Jacobs wrote was about how if you're going to do good public economic development strategy, you have to go with markets, not against them. So I think that is the cautionary note that business, hopefully, and that's one of the roles the partnership wants to play, is help government get a real understanding of what the markets are doing, what's really important to business across the board and to the economy as a whole, rather than an individual issue that won't have negative consequences for the economy, but really trying to define what are those big issues that make a difference. And I think in the example you're giving, that being a good corporate citizen is important for large employers in New York. And we've got a history of that. We're proud of it. We've got a history of great philanthropy. We've got a history of great community relations in New York from our strong companies. And it's really built us into a better city. So I have to say that I think it's important that New York business be held to the highest standards.
My thanks to Kathryn Wylde, President and CEO of the Partnership for New York City. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us.